Has Joe Biden solidified his self-proclaimed status as the most pro-union president ever? Biden visited a United Auto Worker picket line in Michigan yesterday. Here's what he had to say to the striking workers.
Heard me say it many times. Wall Street didn't build the country. The middle class built the country. Unions built the middle class. That's a fact. So let's keep going. You deserve what you've earned, and you've earned a hell of a lot more than you're getting paid now. Thank you very much.
White House Associated Press reporter Sungmin Kim asked Joe Biden if UAW workers should get a 40% increase, and Biden said yes.
Meanwhile, on the other side of the aisle, UAW President Shawn Fain said he will not meet with former President Donald Trump during his upcoming visit to Detroit.
I find a pathetic irony that the former president is going to hold a rally for union members at a non-union business. And, you know, all you have to do is look at his track record. His track record speaks for itself. In 2008, during the Great Recession, he blamed UAW members. He blamed our contracts for everything that was wrong with these companies. That's a complete lie. In 2015, when he was running for president, he talked about doing a rotation, taking all these good-paying jobs in the Midwest and moving them somewhere in the South where people will work for less money, and then to make people beg for their jobs back at lower wages. And the ultimate show of his how much he cares about our workers was in 2019 when he was the president of the United States. Where was he then? Our workers at GM were on strike for 60 days, for 2 months. They were out there on the picket lines. I didn't see him hold a rally. I didn't see him stand up at the picket line, and I sure as hell didn't hear him comment about it.
So here's the question.
He was missing in action.
Here's the question to President. What about the meeting with Trump? Would you meet with him when he's in Detroit tomorrow?
I see no point in meeting with him because I don't think the man has any bit of care about what our workers stand for, what the working class stands for. He serves a billionaire class.
Meanwhile, Republicans have pointed out that Biden spent just 15 minutes on the picket line before boarding Air Force One to head to a fundraiser in California.
All right, I have a lot of mixed feelings about this, Spencer, but the audience has heard from me, so I want to give you a chance to get in here first.
Yeah.
Where are Republicans falling on this? This does seem optically to be a very good moment for Joe Biden, my feelings about him aside. And given that there's such strong public support for union workers generally and these UAW strikers right now, what do you make of Donald Trump's bid to get a piece of the action by going to Detroit?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. In the White House briefing, I believe it was on Monday, Karine Jean-Pierre was asked whether or not the president's decision to go had anything to do with Donald Trump's decision to visit Detroit. She, of course, denied it. But then for probably about 10 minutes, reporters in the room pressed her on whether or not Joe Biden going to stand with the workers meant that he actually stood with the workers and what they're demanding, the pay increase, the reduced hour work week. And she wouldn't say yes. Of course, when Joe Biden got there, he was asked and full-throated endorsement said, yes, I stand with these people and what they're demanding.
Unclear how premeditated that was or how much that was just Biden doing Biden.
We have no idea. I mean, in that situation, he probably thought, you know, I can't say no. I'm standing surrounded by these striking workers who have been on the picket lines for days. But I think it's interesting that they keep pushing, you know, that Joe Biden is the most pro-union president. Of course, he is the same one who said he had reached a deal with the rail union dispute that was going on. But then the agreement that was reached was actually rejected by the union members, and he had to basically plead with Congress to enforce that contract that they had already rejected. So his ability to claim that he's the most pro-union, you know, just because you go to the picket line and don't stay that long, it definitely looked like a photo op. You saw the social media posts from the White House afterwards. It was a very well executed political stunt, for lack of a better term. But of course, it's very much in line with Democrat politics.
Well, let's talk about Republican politics for a while, because while I will agree that there's something stunt-ish about what Joe Biden did, listening to what Shawn Fain said about what Donald Trump's record has been with unions certainly makes Joe Biden look quite good by comparison, even if the bar is lower than I think it should be for a pro-labor, most pro-labor ever president. So this is actually some good reporting from the Hill that kind of went through some of what Trump's record was, starting with him threatening to veto the PRO Act, packing the Supreme Court with anti-union judges who have had decisions like the Janus decision, which unfairly allows public employees to opt out of being in their union, but to enjoy the benefits of collective bargaining regardless, stacking the National Labor Relations Board, the government agency responsible for safeguarding the nation's labor laws with anti-union members and an anti-union general counsel. As President Trump made it legal for companies that violate federal labor laws, including workplace safety protections, to be eligible for federal contracts. He also cut the number of occupational safety and health inspectors to the fewest in history. He tried to weaken mine safety rules. He eliminated overtime pay for 8 million American workers and even wanted to eliminate the minimum wage. And let me tell you, when I say there's about 4 more paragraphs that I'm not reading, there's 4 more paragraphs that I'm not reading. So it does seem that for labor, for working Americans, whether they're in a union or whether they aspire to be in a union, the obvious choice does seem to be to vote for Joe Biden if the alternative is Donald Trump. Would you disagree? And if you do agree, what can Trump and the Republican Party do to turn that around?
I think it's interesting because there's definitely, as we discussed with Biden, that sort of difference between what he says and how he talks about unions and organized labor and what he actually does. And I think the difference is Trump has never pretended to be the most pro-union president. He doesn't want that mantle. He's not claiming that mantle. And so you get basically what you think you're going to get from Trump. And obviously a lot of those things you just mentioned, cutting regulations, cutting things, were part of his larger agenda to cut red tape and federal regulations, and his rule that for every one regulation you put in place, you had to rescind 2 other ones. And it's interesting because obviously the Republican Party has for a long time opposed, especially public sector unions, because you had, whether it was Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker, doing what he did there, and you've got governors in South Carolina and other places, right to work laws, things like that. Mm-hmm. It's very much a Republican thing. But when you look again at 2016 and who voted for Donald Trump, it was a lot of people who are in unions who you would not expect to vote for him necessarily based on the record that you laid out and what he ended up doing between 2017 and 2021.
That's such a good point, because I think, and I've said this on the show a number of times, in 2016 he was talking like he was going to be a pro-union candidate. Not so different than how Joe Biden is sounding, specifically nailing both members of his own party and Democrats on having supported trade deals that were very unfavorable to workers in the 90s. Yeah. I think the difference between 2016 and 2020, when he lost Michigan to Joe Biden, is that he did have to contend with his actual record of being very anti-union. And I do think, while the general public might not be as aware of that, partly because the media isn't as interested in these kind of non-sexy labor issues, the people at those plants and on those picket lines in Michigan definitely could viscerally feel the difference. And as frustrated as I have been with Joe Biden, including his failure to really stand behind and push through the PRO Act, which would have been very important for the labor interests we're talking about now, he has made some significant changes to the NLRB, insufficient, I would argue, but significant, that are scads ahead of what Donald Trump has promised or what his record suggests that he will deliver. So one thing that I've noticed some people talking about is that the right-wing populists who have tried to capture some of that 2016 Trump energy, Hallie and Vance, have said some kind of favorable things about the strike. But there's been some pushback because they're framing a lot of the discourse around this electric vehicle issue and trying to turn the strikes, which my understanding is that the consensus among the auto workers is that we're moving toward electric vehicles. Anyway, it's what the markets are demanding. It's the way the whole world is going, regardless of any regulatory push. And as a consequence, they don't want the jobs to be moved overseas because we don't invest in our own capacity to build electric vehicles. So everyone's on board with that. But Republicans have tried to drive a stake through some of the energy around these protests by saying that they're standing up for the workers' rights to not have to make electric vehicles. And that's muddying up some of the populist message coming from the Vance's, Hallies of the world. Have you followed any of that?
Yeah, it's the Republican argument on that is not that the market is moving towards these electric vehicles. It's that the Biden administration has pretty openly said that they're forcing this energy transition from fossil fuel powered vehicles to electric vehicles. And at the same time, President Biden pledged during the campaign that he would end fossil fuel, which is pretty significant promise to make in the United States of America.
Especially since we are at record high fossil fuel productions, precisely because of Joe Biden, something I'm not happy about, but which he is very proud of. And frankly, most Republicans should be pretty thrilled about as well.
You would think so. There's a difference, however, between how much you're producing and the ability to produce and how, you're producing more, but from limited areas and limited companies. And so that kind of creates...
Opening up the Willow Project in the Arctic wasn't enough?
Well, he's also been cutting, blocking off vast swaths of land for oil and mineral drilling in the middle of the night in some cases. So just because, he does one thing that seems to be a bone tossed to people who are, like you, upset at how much drilling is still going on, he does other things that strip that. And the regulatory regime that he's pursued, just this week, the Department of State, actually, they have an energy sector, and they released this new guidebook on how to cut methane emissions. And it's basically all targeted at forcing the United States and other countries around the world to put more restrictions on oil and gas companies in order to shut that down. So it's all part of this forced transition that requires, because the market obviously is going to favor where there's supply and demand things, the market is not favoring a push to electric vehicles, because right now, as you pointed out, all that stuff is in China. The Biden administration signed a deal to do electric vehicle battery supply chains with countries in Africa that are known to use child and forced labor. It's not
that
working.
is a big problem. But the reason why China is pursuing electric vehicles is because there's a broad understanding, and the car companies, Elon Musk, even all of these people understand
who the White House won't mention.
Well, Elon Musk, if we're going to bring him into the conversation, has been tweeting antagonistically about the labor strike. Unsurprisingly, someone who has been subject to penalties and fines because he's treated his own workers at his own plant so poorly and has engaged in strike-breaking illegal behaviors by tweeting antagonistically about labor on his now own app, is not approving, obviously, here. But what the people at the plants are saying, what Shawn Fain and what the union workers are saying, is that they are happy to be pursuing electric vehicle production because they know that if they don't, they're going to get left behind, because this is the direction that the world is moving in. Also, I shouldn't have to, I think, say this out loud, but because the global warming is happening, and that is why there is a market incentive for so many people to stop using cars that put methane into the environment and cause all of these downstream effects. We do have some actual footage on this particular issue. This is the message some on the picket lines had for Joe Biden on electric vehicles.
Talk all day about research and all of that, but to see us here, seeing what we do, and see that we stand behind these companies. We have been the backbone of these companies for so long, trying to push us out to these electric vehicles. It won't last. We're hard work. We have families. We need this.
So Fox News ran that clip as a line worker addressing Biden negatively about electric vehicles. I didn't hear that in that clip. Yeah. I heard that weird, again, kind of fake tension that I don't think exists between you have to close down the plant or make electric vehicles. And when the push is to make these plants competitive in the electric vehicle market, no?
Mm-hmm. I think that market is obviously Elon Musk is running away with it. And your point, about him having these violations where you have people coming in and saying he's treating workers poorly, there's still a lot of people that want to work for Elon Musk. And so it can't be that bad. It's not like, he's sending them to the salt lines. There's still people who want to work there. And if people want to work in the auto manufacturing field and work in a union plant, that's obviously an option that's available to them, but they're still choosing to work for him. But this idea that car companies want to make electric vehicles and want to go this way forgets the fact that the Biden administration's regulations on fuel efficiency and things have also come into place that are basically requiring these companies to make sure that their entire fleet has a certain minimum average miles per gallon. And that requires them, if they're going to keep making cars that people will actually buy, such as gasoline-powered vehicles. Jennifer Granholm discovered the problems of road trips with electric vehicles. There are a lot of people who don't want to make that switch for those reasons. And so in order to keep making the cars that people still want to buy, they have to make these electric vehicles to offset the miles per gallon and have a more efficient overall fleet. And so it's not necessarily up to these car companies saying, oh, there's a market here, we need to do this. It's them being told by the Biden administration that they need to do this. And I think, when you look at it, I've seen a couple numbers on how electric vehicles require fewer workers to make. So part of the reason that there's a strike here and the workers are worried is because they need this longer contract to make sure that they don't just get thrown to the wayside.
Absolutely. The value of automation should be that people work fewer days, but not that they get their pay cut. We live in a society where technology is going to increasingly mean that we have to decouple the value of human beings from their labor. And I think that's part of why they're requesting these 4-day work weeks as part of this strike. I think that's exactly right. But working less shouldn't mean getting paid less. And that's something the American people are going to have to start internalizing. I just have one last question for you about what you said last about, well, people are still working for Elon Musk. That must mean it can't be that bad. You also mentioned earlier that there were these child laborers in Africa that are being exploited. Does the fact that those children are willing to work in mines, does it the fact that coal workers in West Virginia were willing to get black lung, the fact that people were willing to do labor under constraint mean that the labor must not be that bad?
I think there's a very big difference between working in a Tesla factory in Texas.
But that's not the question.
The question is...
The premise is that if people are willing to do a job, it must not be that bad.
No.
Okay,
That's
all right.
not the premise.
Oh.
We all do jobs at some point that we don't necessarily like, but there's obviously a difference between what's going on in the developing world where these people are being exploited by the Biden administration and people with eyes wide open knowing in Texas as adults that can work wherever they want. You brought up the fact that Elon Musk has employees willing to work for him as evidence that the conditions that they're working under must not be that bad. Or specifically, the real question is whether or not they deserve to be able to unionize the way that Elon Musk has illegally tried to thwart repeatedly so that they can demand fair pay for the labor that they provide to Elon Musk that makes his company so successful. Well, those people aren't being forced to work for Tesla.
Okay, all right. We'll have more Rising for you right after this.